Hey everybody, Dangerous Person here with the inaugural episode of BF3 Fight School. Today's topic of choice will be the aggressive Recon class and how to play it effectively. Now, the very first thing we're going to want to cover is a definition, because a lot of people are unclear on exactly what an aggressive Recon is. So just to clear up the confusion, people think that just because you're an aggressive Recon, it means you're running around getting kills and poning noobs and just causing general mass chaos amongst the enemy team. That's not entirely true, because an aggressive Recon can still be aggressive regardless of performance. What matters is how he approaches the game. In my mind, an aggressive Recon is a Recon class player who's always up on the front lines of the battle. He's always moving around from uncapped objective to uncapped objective, helping his team take points. But he doesn't shy away from the traditional Recon roles, so he still has the opportunity to provide overwatch and cover approaches and shoot enemies from a far distance. But for the most part, you're going to be right up in the thick of action. As an aggressive Recon, you probably want to be going with some closer range weapons, and I'll go over weapons in a bit. I apologize that this is kind of a long video. It actually would have been longer, but my hard drive filled up before I could finish recording. I will be posting a table of contents in the description if you want to just jump to the parts that are more relevant to you. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the strengths and weaknesses that come with aggressive Recon players, what you can expect to excel at and what you can expect to have a deficit in. The first major strength that aggressive Recon players have is that they're very adaptable. Battlefield is a collection of a whole bunch of little, I like to call them micro ecosystems of combat, where every objective plays out a little differently than the one prior. You get into long range confrontations, you get into short range confrontations, you got high grounds and low grounds and vehicles and all sorts of variables to account for. And the aggressive Recon does a really good job of staying adaptable in that environment. The reason I say this is because aggressive Recons have weapon loadouts that accommodate every range you can think of in the game. So whereas a engineer has only carbines, PDWs, and shotguns to choose from, that puts it strictly in the short range as far as combat goes, aggressive Recons have PDWs and shotguns they can play around with for short range combat, but they also default to sniper rifles. And among sniper rifles, there are two variants. You got your semi-auto and your bolt-action sniper rifles. Semi-autos for mid-range and beyond. Bolt-action's much better for long-range, though they can all be used in the short range as well. Alongside that same vein of thought, Recon players have access to a whole plethora of great gadgets that really help out their team, and are definitely interchangeable as the situation depends. So that's why I say the aggressive Recon class is a very adaptable class. It's also very good at being either a team player or being a lone wolf. You can lone wolf it as a aggressive Recon. There's no need to always stick around your teammates, especially if your teammates happen to be particularly useless, as they kind of tend to be in pub servers once in a while. So you know, don't feel bad about going off and fighting on your own sometimes, because the class was originally conceived to be more of a lone wolf class than, say, the support class. So that has that going for it. Another great benefit to playing an aggressive Recon class is that your situational awareness goes up tremendously. You have access to tugs, you have access to Mavs. As a result, you tend to have a better picture of what's going on around you. A good aggressive Recon player will pay diligent attention to his mini-map, so he'll always know where the enemies are. If you have a good set of headphones, you can hear them around you directionally, so situational awareness really comes into play big time as an aggressive Recon, just because it's so easy for them. On to some weaknesses of the class. Obviously, as a Recon player, you cannot engage vehicles in combat. Now, there are some caveats to this, and I will go over them a bit later in the sort of movements and tactics section. But for the most part, a Recon player is pretty much forced to retreat whenever they go up against a tank or an APC or whatever have you. It is problematic if you are lone wolfing it a bit, or if you're not anywhere near anybody who has any anti-vehicle capabilities. Close combat is another area that the Recon suffers. You don't have assault rifles or carbines. Even LMGs outperform most PDWs or shotguns at anything beyond, say, 10 meters. So close combat is a deficient area for the aggressive Recon. Further weakness of aggressive Recons is, especially if you're using sniper rifle in particular, engaging multiple enemies can be a bit of a hassle because you fire a lot more slowly than the damage output of your standard carbine. You will often find yourself losing straight up in fights against 2 or more people. That is a weakness to look out for, and later on I will talk about how to mitigate that weakness as well. So, moving right into the meat of the lesson, if you will, let's talk about the roles and responsibilities that an aggressive Recon can expect to be dealt in his game. Particularly because the aggressive Recon is so adaptable, you find it fits many roles very well. It can be used both offensively and defensively without sort of losing its aggression tag and just becoming a quote-unquote camping bastard. Offensively, the aggressive Recon makes a really good, I guess you could call it a scout or a spy, particularly if you couple your weapon choice with something a little more stealthy. Because you have excellent situational awareness, you are really good at getting to an objective before the rest of your team and knowing whether or not there's a great deal of resistance there. Part of being an aggressive Recon is picking your battles. Because you have excellent situational awareness, it's actually very easy to know when you should engage and when you should disengage enemies. And for that reason, the aggressive Recon makes a great scouting or vanguard kind of unit. They also perform quite well as regular infantry. If you mix yourself in with general ground forces, you can provide much needed support in the ways of motion detection. You can provide fire support if you have friendlies around you who make for multiple targets for your enemies to engage as well. So don't discount the whole being on the front lines and being just a regular part of the game aspect of the aggressive Recon class. Defensively, aggressive Recons excel in the fields of Overwatch, so if your team's moving up to cap an objective, you want to take a good vantage point still and pick off enemies who may be on the approach, or give early warning at the very least that there are enemies incoming. As someone who has excellent situational awareness in this class, this is a very easy job to fill. You can also block routes. You can watch lanes of activity and just keep your team informed as to where the enemy is moving. One thing I like to do as an aggressive Recon is I like to get in the back of combat and move between captured objectives just to do a quick sweep and make sure that nobody's snuck by the front line or are jeep spawn bombing or parachuting in or using radio beacons to drop in from the sky, just to make sure everything's all clear and give my team that sort of peace of mind to concentrate on the front lines. Can also just be a general sniper too. There's nothing in the rules that says you can't grab a M98B and pick someone off from 500 meters away as an aggressive Recon. You can still do the standard things that come to mind when you think of the word sniper. The only difference is you don't want to be doing it all game, because it doesn't really help your team as much as you would like it to, but it still does help. I mean, every kill is a ticket lost for the enemy team, which brings you that much closer to victory. So aggressive Recon is still a really adaptable role. It doesn't have a defined set of obligations, but you'll find that it can fill most needs on the battlefield very well. You just need to be situationally aware of what exactly your team needs when they need it, and then you need to jump in and fill that role. So if that means going to capture a uncapped objective that's a little out of the way and nobody's bothered to get around to capping it because everyone's on the front line slugging it out, then that can fall onto you and you have to infiltrate. Or if they need more bolstered forces up at the front because the enemy's making a big push, you can either jump in and be right on the front lines with a PDW, maybe gunning people down in short range, or you can be up on a building about 15-20 meters away with a semi-auto sniper rifle and just be picking guys off. It's really up to the situation to dictate how you play your role. So on to the interesting stuff. Let's talk about weapons for a second. Now, as I mentioned before, you have a choice between basically 4 different weapon classes, you have your standard sniper rifles that come with recon classes, which are bolt action or semi-auto. Your semi-auto snipers, as I said, are good for your mid-range engagements. Your bolt actions are better for your long range. But there's nothing stopping you from using them in pretty much any situation. A lot of it depends on the optic that you choose to use. If you think that you're going to be getting into a lot of long-range engagements, you can put a 8 times or 12 times scope on your semi-auto sniper rifle and still use it to engage targets at 500 meters plus. However, certain weapons are much better for certain situations. I wouldn't go into capture an objective that has maybe 3 or 4 people around it with a bolt action sniper rifle. It just doesn't work. You'll get outgunned every time. So for that reason, you want to fall back on your more short range weapons, your shotguns and your PDWs. As far as sniper rifles go, I have certain preferences for ones over other ones. For bolt actions, I really like the M98. I mean, you can't beat its damage. It's the longest range weapon in the game. The new JNG that came out with Close Quarters expansion pack also serves this role really well. But when it comes to weapons, on the whole, you need to be very comfortable with a weapon, and you will always do better with the weapon you're most comfortable with. As far as semi-auto snipers go, I'm partial to the EMR, although I've been playing around with the 417, the new one that came with Close Quarters, and I found it to be very effective. But again, just go with what you're comfortable with, go with what you're used to. PDWs and shotguns, you've got a whole bunch for a whole different set of ranges. The PDWs range from more mid-range PDWs like the PP2000 to incredibly short-range ones like the M5K. And shotguns are the same, whether you put slugs on them for longer range shotguns, whether you use an automatic or a pump action shotgun. You just basically go with what's most comfortable, and you also go with what's needed on the battlefield at the time. If you notice that your team is very behind on objective capturing and you have maybe 1 or 2 objectives left on a 7 objective map, you'll probably want to go with a more close range weapon, just because you're going to be doing a lot of that capping yourself. Your team has shown that they're trying to hold off their best, so your role is to sneak in behind enemy lines in that case and ninja cap some objectives. For this reason, the attachments I recommend generally involve silencers. Since the patch, silencers have been given just a bit of a buff where they don't sort of reduce the damage at range as much as they used to. So even on a semi-auto sniper rifle, silencers are very, very good. You can also go with things like flash suppressors or extended mags, depending on the situations. But for the most part, I find you can't really go wrong with a suppressor on an aggressive recon class weapon. Now, pistols, on the other hand, are an entirely different beast. Because you lack punch in the short range with a sniper rifle, you're going to rely on your pistol a lot more. If you have a PDW or a shotgun, it's not as important, because anything that a pistol can do in short range, a shotgun or PDW can do better. But with a sniper rifle, you'll find that you're going to want that extra bit of firepower, and for that reason, I recommend the G18 suppressed. It's probably my go-to pistol for my aggressive recon play, as well as most people's recon play. When you think about it, it just fills the gap of automatic fire that the class sorely misses when it's running with a sniper rifle. So the G18 is a good choice. The M93R is a bit overpowered right now, so by all means, if you feel like taking advantage of that, go right ahead. It's a good weapon as well, but once again, with weapons, it comes down to what you're most comfortable with, what you have experience with, and what you feel you'll be able to get good kills with. So to summarize my point on weapons, I guess you could say that the class is very well suited to any sort of weapon and most different play styles, and what it comes down to is really what you're most comfortable with. One piece of advice I would give you, and I didn't use it in this video that I'm demonstrating here, is run with a silencer, because a lot of the aggressive recon's playstyle relies on stealth and getting the jump on people, since you tend to lose battles in the short range. So a suppressor is never really a bad way to go. As for gadget choices, as a recon player, you have the choice between 3 different gadgets for one of your slots, and obviously the mandatory radio beacon for the other one. Mav and tugs generally are preferred for this class, just because you want to keep your situational awareness really high, and you want to provide your teammate with spotting bonuses and things like that. So tugs I prefer over Mavs, just because Mavs take a bit more time to deploy. They have about the same motion detection capability. Obviously you can fly Mavs and use it to take out equipment and stuff, but because you're an aggressive recon, you don't want to be stuck behind the control panel of some Mav and just playing through the Mav. You want to be putting down motion detection really quick and then moving on to your next thing. So for that reason, I really advocate using a tugs. The proper way you want to use a tugs is you want to put it down just before you enter a big area that you think might have a lot of traffic. You can also use it to watch your back when you don't have any teammates around. Because you don't have things like claymores and stuff, it's a really good early warning system if you need to defend. It also lets you just confirm your suspicions that there may or may not be an enemy in the area. If I'm in an area and I think I hear something running around, I'll just throw down my tugs real fast just to confirm that there is or isn't anybody there. It's basically a free wall hack. I mean, you might as well use it as much as you can. Don't forget to pick it up when you leave an area. I'm pretty guilty of leaving my tugses behind and hoping to just find one in an ammo crate somewhere. So you may want to consider being a little more quick to deploy and then pack up your tugs. It also really helps your team. I mean, I can't count the number of times I've played an assault class or something and just seen hundreds of recons around who don't throw any motion detection around on an objective. It makes no sense to me. It's free points. It's like throwing down a med kit or throwing down an ammo box. It's free points for the recon. It helps your team greatly. Just go ahead and do it. Get used to using those things. You can also go with the SOFLAMs on larger vehicle heavy maps like say Op Firestorm or Caspian Border. The problem I have with the SOFLAM is that 1, it gives away your position. 2, it doesn't really help your situational awareness any. I mean, yes, engineers will love you for it, but at the same time, that's not your role. You're not playing the standard sniper class role. You're playing a aggressive recon. You want to be on the front lines. So for that reason, I tend to avoid SOFLAMs. They don't work too great in the short range anyways, which is where most of your combat's taking on. Your best case scenario is just to avoid vehicles altogether regardless. So, spawn beacon usage. Now, spawn beacons are a bit of a tricky little device to use properly. Some things to take into consideration when you're using your spawn beacon is the location you choose to put it and the situations in which you choose to use it. So, as far as locations go, most people know by now that if you put a spawn beacon inside of a building or inside something that doesn't have direct access to the sky, you'll spawn directly on the beacon. But if you put it outside, you will spawn in on a parachute above the beacon, as well as anybody who spawns in on your beacon. That's something to keep in mind. On big open maps, I generally like to put them outside because it gives me greater flexibility to maneuver myself into position from my paradrop. However, if there's a tactically important place that's really important to keep, for instance, a good spot to overview an objective or something like that, I'll put it inside just because I want to spawn on that exact spot. Once again, like the tugs, it's important to know when to pack up your beacon and when to leave it. Most of the time you'll end up just leaving it though, because it doesn't really benefit from being moved around too much. As far as situations to use your beacon in my mind, there are basically 3 different areas that the spawn beacon has use for as an aggressive recon. You can use it for area control, which means if you move into an area that you want to hold, say a very centralized core group of objectives, you throw a spawn beacon down there, you can drop in anywhere on the area and you can get right into the thick of things immediately. Also, if you want, you can use it to spawn bomb. If you're on a fairly competent team, you basically get in behind enemy lines, you throw down your beacon, your team spawns on it, or your squad I should say spawns on it, and you then instantly have an army in the area. So that's another good time to use the spawn beacon. You can also use it as a safety net of sorts to fall back on. If you think that you're going to die at some point and you really don't want to give up the spot, throw down a spawn beacon. It'll give you the peace of mind in knowing that you can instantly respawn in that area and get back to where you were. Also, and I think this goes without saying, when you put down a spawn beacon, make sure it's hidden well enough. I know it beeps and it's pretty big, so it's fairly easy for enemies to spot, but at least try and put it somewhere out of the way. If you put it out in the middle of the open, odds are it's just going to get gunned down immediately by the enemy anyways, so don't just waste them, put them somewhere useful, make some attempt to hide them. Moving right along, because I know this is getting kind of lengthy, let's go into movement and maneuvering that you're going to want to know as an aggressive recon. There's a few certain moves you want to have nailed down pat before you even try to really take on the class effectively. The first one is stealth. You need to be adept at killing with silencers and knives and hiding your approach on objectives, just because, as I mentioned before, recon classes tend to lose out in short-range combat against assault rifles, carbines, and such. So the more you can get a drop on people, the more that they're oblivious to your presence, the better your odds are at surviving the encounter. You also want to learn when to hold your fire, so you don't just shoot at targets that you know you can't hit. Because shooting at targets is the easiest way to give away your presence, you got to know when to pick your battles, when to open fire on your enemies, and just when to let them run away. Next, flanking. Flanking is a huge part of being an aggressive recon. Your team tends to keep people engaged at the edge of objectives. Your job is to go around the back and get the drop. This falls, again, onto the whole concept of using surprise to your advantage to take enemies down. It's very important that you learn flanking, when to flank. If you're getting damaged head-on in combat, it's not uncommon to sort of escape the situation, go around, flank, and get the drop on them in the back. Just because they've opened fire on you before doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be surprised again. So learn how to flank effectively, learn how to look for opportunities to flank, know the routes on different maps that you can take. Just get used to that. Tactical insertions, now that's just spawning on your radio beacon. It's something you're going to be doing constantly as an aggressive recon because you're moving around so much from objective to objective. It's really helpful in letting you get to areas of high activity very quick. You want to spawn in and go to what I call hot zones. Basically, hot zones are areas of the map that are seeing a lot of combat. They're easily recognizable by explosives going off or tracer rounds being fired or vehicles moving around. And the reason why you want to get into hot zones is because you're playing an aggressive recon. So it's where you will be most beneficial to your team on the whole. You can also use tactical insertions to approach an objective from a better, more secure route or get the drop on people who don't expect to be there. It helps you retake areas. So really learn how to spawn in effectively, where to go, which routes to take, that sort of thing. As far as parachuting from your spawn beacon, it's really important that you get some practice maneuvering your parachute. Parachuting can be a little awkward and cumbersome at times, so just get familiar with it. Know what to look for from the air. Obviously, you want to go into hot zones, but you don't want to land on the ground in front of a vehicle. You want to take vantage points. You want to land on top of buildings in places where vehicles can't get you, that sort of thing. When you're landing in a parachute, make sure you hold down the S key. It's kind of hard to forget this sometimes because you find yourself jumping off of high places in the heat of the moment and you just kind of forget. But if you hold the S key when you're landing, it flares up your parachute and you don't take any damage from the fall. Whereas if you're holding the W key to say move down a little faster, you will take full damage from your landing. So just press the S key just before you land, hold it down, and you will land sans damage. Now the important bit, how to cap a flag as an aggressive recon. It's a bit different than your standard infantryman. Your standard infantryman will just run into an area, shoot up everybody in the area, start capping the flag, hope his team backs him up, that sort of thing. As an aggressive recon who's running a vanguard role, you're going to be going into areas just ahead of everybody else. What this means is that you need to move up from the outskirts of the objective. Don't just land on the objective. You want to secure a perimeter around any objectives that you're trying to cap, and you also want to be aware of how many enemies may be in the area. Obviously, throw down your tugs just when you get into an area to learn how many are there. You don't want to be moving in onto areas with tons of enemies, so make sure your approach is very calculated and methodical, and then you can feel free to leave the area once your team shows up to back you up. You won't get those sweet capture points, but at the same time, you're going to keep the enemies on their toes. You're going to keep the combat flow moving. You don't need to really just sit there and get points. It's not helping the team so much as it is just helping yourself. So once your team comes in to back you up, just take off. Feel free to go. Spawn bombing, by the same measure, is a tactic where you get in behind enemy lines to a desirable location, you throw down your radio beacon, or you just stay alive, and your squad spawns on you. This is very handy in areas with very defined front lines, and you need to sort of flank the enemies with a large group of people. Just learn how to do it. There are many videos online telling you how to spawn bomb. It's an incredibly useful talent to have. You need to have excellent communication with your squad in order to do it, so make sure that you master that sort of aspect of things, but otherwise it comes into play quite a bit as an aggressive recon. Lastly, when you're going against vehicles, there's a whole nother set of maneuvering required. Obviously, you can't take a vehicle head-on, so your best bet is to just run away from it. However, if a vehicle is on fire, indicating that it's been disabled, you want to stick around. You want to stay close to it. You want to keep your line of sight from it broken, so it can't really shoot you, but you want to keep it spotted so that you know where it is. Because odds are somebody's going to come up and start fixing that vehicle, or they're just going to bail and it's going to explode. Either way, you're going to be there to take advantage and get the drop on the guy who's around the vehicle, and you get a free kill that way. So make sure that you follow along with disabled vehicles from a safe distance, but otherwise you're just going to be avoiding them entirely. So I think that wraps up this iteration of BF3 Fight School for the aggressive recon. As you may have been able to tell early on, the video doesn't necessarily sync up with my audio. I'm recording the audio about a week after I took the video. I've thrown some cues, some lessons up on the video at the same time that are a bit different than what I've been talking about, just because they're a little more situationally dependent. But by all means, thanks for sticking in. I know it's a long video. I'm sorry that it cut off at the end because I ran out of recording space. I'm sorry that my performance isn't that great in it. Aggressive Recon is probably one of my weaker roles, so I'm just sharing everything I know about it. And I would say largely ignore the chat box in the upper left corner unless you know how to speak Portuguese, because I'm playing on a Brazilian server in this match. I don't know why. I'm in Canada, but for some reason I get the best ping on Brazilian servers. I can't explain it. But there's a lot of talk up there that I don't really understand what's going on, so I would ignore it. Anyways, so thanks for, taking the time to stick around with this video, guys. As I said before, I'll put a table of contents in the description of this video on YouTube so that you can jump around to the sections you want to know particular details about. Obviously, I will be coming out with another video. I'm not sure how long, but if you really liked this one, subscribe maybe or like it. I don't generally have a dependence on those sort of mechanics to encourage me to go further with my actions, but by all means, feedback is appreciated. If you got any comments or tips you'd like to share, go right ahead. If you want to hate on me in the comments section, then it's a free country, you can do whatever you want. But if you ask any questions down there, I will try and answer them. I'll try and check as often as I can. So thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys later. This has been BF3 Fight School, the aggressive recon class. I'm Dangerous Person, your host. Have a great day, guys.